Hello everyone and welcome to the Quality in Action webinar for this month. This is a monthly webinar series hosted by the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota. Our topic this month, as you can see, is going beyond the background check, incorporating safe practices and volunteer programs. Just having read different articles and things that recently, I'm pretty excited that we have this topic today. It's been exciting to see all the registrations. We've only got about half of the folks who've registered for the webinar who are logged in at this point, but we can at least get some of the introductions and logistics out of the way, and hopefully people will be hopping on as we get rolling here. Just a note, if you have participated in our monthly Quality in Action webinars in the past, they're typically 1 hour long. They usually run from noon until 1 p.m. Central Time. Today's webinar is extended 30 minutes, so we will go until 1:30 today. In case you didn't know that, just wanted to mention that up front. Just a lot of content, a lot of things to cover. And we can just talk about some logistics, how to answer questions and that sort of thing. I guess first of all, I'll introduce myself. This is April Reardon speaking. I'm the Director of Training and Community Partnerships here at the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota. And so we have quite a few people registered for this month's webinar. This topic was definitely of interest to everyone. We can, throughout the broadcast then, you have the opportunity to ask questions or share your comments. And there are a couple different ways to do that. Everyone will be unmuted here from the beginning, and we'll try to maintain that just so we can manage background noise and that sort of thing. However, we also know that some of you are not participating with any audio. You're just listening to the broadcast. So there's a couple ways. If you have audio, if you're on the phone, or if you have a microphone, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you and you can make your comment or ask your question just voice to voice. Or there's also the questions section in your control panel, and you can type your questions in that area. And I'll be responding to questions today as Sarah, I haven't even introduced Sarah yet, but we'll do that as she's working through the presentation. But I can either respond directly to you, because sometimes folks have questions that are really specific and I can say, or that's coming up, or things like that. Otherwise, we may possibly share your question with all of the attendees if it's something that applies to everyone. What we'll do is not necessarily just interrupt at any point, but we'll kind of keep an eye on the questions, and Sarah will pause at different points and we can ask those questions, but feel free to submit those at any time. You could start submitting them now, and we'll see if we get to those, and at the end we'll have some time to ask some of those questions too. But it's been our experience sometimes with questions, particularly when it comes to this particular topic and thinking about screening mentors, that sometimes the questions you have at the beginning are definitely going to be answered throughout during the presentation, and so sometimes my response might be just to hold tight and the answer's coming. I think that's it, but so if you do raise your hand and are speaking when you're unmuted, just be sure to monitor your background noise, the laughter from the next desk, or if you're at home and the baby's crying or that sort of thing, it can be really distracting. All right, so I'm just going to introduce our presenter. Happy to have Sarah Kremer from Friends for Youth in California. She is the program director there. I've met Sarah several times, but I remember at one point out for a walk and talking on the phone and saying, yeah, we should do some webinars together or figure out a way to present the SAFE material this way. And now we're glad to have her, but she's in great demand too. Some folks may have heard her on the Mentor Elements of Effective Practice series and as she will mention later in the presentation, she will be offering a free webinar series as well, so it's something to keep an eye on. Also wanted to thank her for, and this will be mentioned again too, but for offering a book discount, the Screening Applicants for Effectiveness book, which is available from Friends for Youth. For those of you who are participating in the webinar, you will get a code that you can use for a discount on getting that book, which is something that would highly recommend all of you having in your offices. And without taking up any more time for introductions and logistics, I will hand it over here to Sarah, and we can just get started with the presentation, and I'll be watching for everyone's questions.
Great.
Actually, there's just a couple logistical questions, and okay. One question is, could these be recorded so that I can view them at my convenience? I have been recording our webinars. We're still working out on our end where we can post them. Our website doesn't have the capacity to hold them, and sometimes they're bigger because they're webinars and they're interactive. They're bigger than what some of the typical video upload, online video upload programs will handle. So we are working really hard on that. So yes, we hope to have them available. And the slides should be available on SlideShare right now, but if not now, then definitely available after the webinar. And we send a follow-up email that has a direct link to our SlideShare account, and I'll also show that at the end of the presentation so that you can see where to get those. So if you have to leave a little bit early, don't worry, you'll get a follow-up email from the Mentoring Partnership with a link to those slides. There we go. All right, Sarah, now for real.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, April. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here. Some of you may have already heard some of this material before. I've been leading these trainings for about 5 years. So a lot of it is based on, move to our next slide, based on our book called Screening Applicants for Effectiveness, Guidelines to Prevent Child Molestation in Mentoring and Youth-Serving Organizations. We've had it out for 5 years now. And it's great to just get this material out there and talk to more people about it. So I really thank April for having me here to do this. And if you've seen any of this material before, so a lot of it is still the same, but each time I do a presentation, I try to add a little bit more. So hopefully there's something new in here for you. And I will say that I did the thing that organizers really hate, is that I just sent April. I changed a few slides this morning, and I just sent it to her. So you'll see, hopefully you'll see the new version on SlideShare that you can look at. And I really try, I know it's a lot of material, but I try to make the slides as comprehensive as possible, so when you go back and look through it, it makes sense to you without listening to me. So let's go ahead and get started. I will say a little bit about Friends for Youth. We are a 31-year-old nonprofit youth mentoring organization in Northern California, as April said. We're located just south of San Francisco, and we have a one-to-one community-based mentoring program that we've been operating since 1979. And in 1998, we started our Mentoring Institute to help other programs know more about best practices and share the lessons that we've learned over time in how to have a really safe and effective mentoring program. So that's my job, is to go out and help other programs. We have a number of resources like SAFE. We have trainings like this, and as April mentioned, a new webinar series that I'll talk about at the very end. We also have an annual mentoring conference every January, and April has been a presenter there, and I'm hoping that she'll come back again. We also have a number of other kind of networking and other resources that happen throughout the year. So if you're interested, you can go on our website and sign up to be on our email list. Okay, let me go ahead and start the presentation. And as April said, it's great if I know people have lots of questions about this topic. Maybe think about your question. You can write it down, and if we don't cover it during a certain section, then we'll open it up to questions and try to address them. But a lot of times the answer is already coming up. So don't worry if your question doesn't get answered right away. But we're going to talk a little bit about the purpose and relevance in terms of effectiveness of screening and screening for safety. And then we'll get into the real important information of what do you use, how do you use it, and what are you looking for. And a little bit at the end, just some basic information about other important elements on teamwork, training, and supervision. Okay, so basically, this shouldn't be news to anyone. There is really a good reason why we have to talk about this. There's some great quotes from research on here that I think most of you have probably already seen. The first quote I think is really important. It came from a resource brief. Good intentions and a ready core of volunteers are not enough to deliver an effective youth mentoring program. A solid infrastructure is essential, and a screening process is part of that solid infrastructure. And we know that if you don't have something set up in place and the mentoring program is not effective and doesn't go as you plan, it can have a lot of negative impacts on young people. Many of you have seen this chart before. This is explaining what happens, well, in a specific study, what happened to young people who were matched in a one-to-one community-based program that was expected to last for 1 year. And they measured a couple different outcomes: competence and attendance at school, pro-social behaviors, and abstinence from drugs and alcohol. And you can see from the columns here that for young people whose match lasted less than 6 months, and they took out the young people where they moved away, something happened. This was really based on the relationship wasn't working out. They did actually worse than they were at the beginning. 0 is baseline. So we know that if you match a young person and it doesn't work out, it's worse than if you had never matched them at all. You can see if the match lasted between 6 and 12 months and more than 12 months, you see small gains. So that's kind of a general overview of what we believe is important about mentoring is you see small steps. But if it's not going to work out, you see much larger losses. So when you're talking about effectiveness, and a lot of what we're going to talk today about is safety, but I did want to touch on a little bit in terms of effectiveness, because you can have a lot of people who are no problem with the safety, but they just don't seem to follow through as great mentors or even good enough mentors. And here's some considerations you want to look at. Do they have the time to volunteer? Do they have the ability to follow through? Do they have the characteristics and skills that you're looking for in an effective mentor? Are they open to learning, not only from you as a program, but also from the young person? Are they able to work within the program guidelines? And that's really important when you start. We'll see some examples in terms of safety as well. Are they able to set limits and boundaries with their mentee? And do they have a really stable sense of themselves? Excuse me. So here are some things that we're looking for in terms of the right mentor attitude. Mentors see that the relationship is the intervention. They take responsibility for their mentoring relationship, which means they don't just leave a few messages and expect their mentee to call them back right away. And when the mentee doesn't call back, say, well, I guess he's not interested. They're the ones who are consistent and persistent in making that work. That they respect youth viewpoints and are also willing to help them through their issues. However, if you drop one below that, they realize they can't solve all of the mentee's issues. They're just there to walk along next to them as they go through this, through whatever developmental level they're at. That they have realistic expectations and they rely on the program for support. Here's some other pieces that have come from research in terms of what exactly you're looking for. These should make sense. Somebody who's emotionally balanced, somebody who shows that non-judgmental attitude, also the unconditional positive regard for a young person, able to share their own life stories, but again within an appropriate, kind of appropriate level, and somebody who's really understanding of what's going on with young people that they're working with. And it doesn't mean they have to come from that same background, but they just have to be open to learning about it. Being flexible, being able to see the potential, not the faults, and someone who can maintain boundaries is really important. So now we're going to switch and talk a little bit about why we have to talk about this in terms of safety. This is a quote from a psychologist who works up in Canada with some child predators. And as you can read on the screen, there are a number of them who actually try to find organizations like ours because we have this great population of who they're looking for to assault. And young people in our programs oftentimes have already been molested, so that they're already vulnerable and they're already ready to go. And I will say, too, that I attended a conference, the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers, last year, and one researcher was telling me that he did an exhaustive interview study of convicted child molesters over in England, and he said that one of them told him that he has something that he kind of compared to, some people use the phrase gaydar, where they can sense when someone is gay. And he said he has this other sense where he can tell who the most vulnerable children are in the room, and that's who he targets. So they're already looking towards connecting with these very vulnerable youth, and they're looking for ways to do it easily. Obviously, it's pretty uncomfortable to talk about, although I will say in 5 years, I've seen a lot more openness and more people who are interested and able to confront some of these really difficult ideas. The idea that your program is setting a young person up to be molested is pretty horrifying. There were a lot of nights when I worked in our direct services program for 4 years before I moved into our mentoring institute. There were some nights when I would wake up and wonder if I did the right thing. You're putting a young person in an extremely vulnerable position, especially if you're not sure about the volunteer. And of course, there's a lot of liability for an organization if something like this happens. I'm not going to go over these because there's a lot of information out there in terms of the effects of sexual abuse, what could potentially happen to a young person. And if you or your staff doesn't already have this in place, I highly recommend contacting your local child abuse prevention council and getting some training on child abuse prevention and just being aware of the signs and what you should be looking for. So basically, when you're talking about screening for safety, and this is parallels what we're talking about in terms of effectiveness, you're looking for a mentor who will not endanger the life of their mentee, which seems like basic information, but you want to make sure you put it out there. Somebody who demonstrates good judgment, has a safe home environment, and that is, of course, for programs who are community-based, or perhaps there's a chance for the mentee to meet the mentor in his or her home. And at the most basic level, that they will not be physically, mentally, sexually, or verbally abusive. And I have a couple slides in here that are called case studies, just some examples I wanted to highlight. 2 years ago now, they did, a couple groups got together and they did a telephone survey of nonprofits who use volunteers. And this was pretty, I don't know if I should say horrifying, but pretty interesting. That 12% of those who responded do not screen volunteers at all. And again, this is not just nonprofits who work with youth. So these are things like food pantries, environmental work. So there may be some chances where it may not make sense for them to work with or to have these kinds of screening steps in place. But still, not screening at all is probably an extreme end. And the examples for why they didn't do it: screening isn't useful, it costs too much, it may offend the potential volunteers. And that's something I've heard from a lot of programs about why they don't want to have a certain step in place is, we don't want volunteers to get the wrong idea, and we don't want them to think that we think there's something wrong with them. And I have to say that in my experience, if you have volunteers who are willing to do this work and to connect with a young person, they're fine with whatever kind of steps you put in place. They will do it. And if someone has any kind of hesitation, if you say, we understand that it may seem like kind of a more lengthy process to go through, or maybe this seems unnecessary, but we're here to protect the safety of our young people in the program, so we hope that you understand it from that perspective. And the people who are there for the right reasons will definitely kind of back up and say, oh, of course, I didn't even think about that. No problem, let me do this. So here's some other pieces of that case study that you can see. Interesting to say that half of them who do screen report that their process did identify an inappropriate candidate. At Friends for Youth, we did a local study in our own county using some of the same questions, and I've been doing a lot of trainings here for all kinds of youth serving programs, and we looked at just youth serving nonprofits. We found that 97% screen volunteers in some way, which is fantastic. 33% using youth as volunteers only use one step, which is something for us to work on. And you can see some of the other pieces. And at the bottom, 82% report that screening has identified inappropriate candidates. So obviously, I'm getting myself out there and talking to a lot of people, and it seems to be working. Okay, so some general priorities. As the mentoring program, you're there to serve youth and to keep them safe in your program. We know that there's a lot of material and a lot of instruction on how to really help your volunteers and support them and help them be the best mentors they can be. But please remember that serving young people is your ultimate and primary goal. Here's a case study. Oprah Winfrey has done so many great things in terms of bringing the concept of child molestation to a national conversation level. And there's some links on here that particular shows where she really works with that. And if I'm doing an extended training, usually in person as well, we'll take a look at some of those clips and talk about some of the things that we see and the behaviors. And the one at the top is a series that she just finished over this winter and spring. I highly recommend it just to go in, dip in. You can even do it for a staff training to listen to or talk with child molesters and see what they're telling her. It's a great piece of information about this topic. Another example is a movie called Chicken Hawk: Men Who Love Boys, and this was a documentary produced in 1994, and it was covering a couple, I think it was about 4 or 5 men who are part of the NAMBLA movement, and that's the North American Man-Boy Love Association. So it's absolutely fascinating. I got my copy from a police officer who I've done trainings with. He worked undercover in the child exploitation unit in San Jose, and he gave me I'm not sure where he got it from, but he gave me a copy and said, don't copy this for anyone. But then I found out that more recently that there are portions of it up on YouTube. So again, this is a great thing to use for staff training. Really clear examples. Once you kind of know what you're looking for, you see it right away in a lot of these guys. Okay, some basic facts about who these perpetrators are. Most abusers are known. I think it's a lot of people have this conception of the stranger danger concept that was kind of out there for a number of years, but it's really more likely for a young person to be abused by someone that they actually know. Most of those come from within their family, but the rest come from outside the family. So friends, colleagues, teachers, coaches, neighbors, and even some mentors. Here's an example of some newspaper articles, and I have a really thick binder that I've been keeping track of articles locally and also nationally, and these are all from our local area in Northern California. There's a gym teacher, there's a volunteer through a church program, a substitute teacher, a nurse in San Diego, a math teacher and ex-football coach, and a scout leader. So these were all within the last 5 years, and if you're paying attention to it, they come up probably once a week. And actually this morning I was listening to the radio on the way in. My local NPR station was doing an hour conversation on, there's a new law in California that's in the legislature about monitoring and restricting convicted sex offenders' behavior at this point. So it's out there. There are lots of people talking about it. And in particular to mentors, a lot of people ask, okay, well, these are some other people out in the community, may not have anything to do with us. These are examples of articles that I've found of people who were serving as mentors, whether in a formal program or kind of informally outside of a program, or maybe as a role within another job that they had. And there's a lot of people here who somehow got past some kind of screening mechanism and actually ended up molesting a young person. The most recent was in Connecticut. It was an executive director of a youth-serving organization. Right below that in D.C., a counselor/mentor. You can see the other ones on here. I will say, you can see in August of 2009, Lakeland, Florida. It's actually where I grew up. So this was a church mentor who, I guess the mother contacted him through her church and asked him to mentor her son. So we really need to do a good job of informing parents about what to look for as well. And then some other examples. Oh, the one right above that, Buffalo, New York, this was a caseworker. He was actually a registered sex offender, and he had somehow gotten through the screening process of his organization, but when they merged with another agency and the new agency director had everyone rescreened, they found this information and they fired him right away. And then this caseworker went back to some of the families that he had been working with and convinced them to let him work with their children outside of any kind of actual agency contract. And that's when the abuse happened. So there are people who will find all kinds of ways to have access.
Hey, Sarah, this is April.
Yeah.
Have you read the Washington Post story about this Kevin Ricks, somebody in North Carolina, sort of, and around that area? He was a teacher and tutor, and it goes the abuse that he was doing went back about 30 years, and in various roles as a would mentor his students and do things outside of school, and then doing the extra tutoring, but then also with exchange students and different things. But I can include that in the follow-up email, just because it, I read through that kind of in preparing. It came up, and it was just in the Washington Post on July 25th, so it's pretty recent, and sort of this thing where people overlooked things for years and years and years, or had like a weird feeling, and so it raised a lot of questions that I think the presentation will cover. But
great, yeah, that would be fantastic. I hadn't heard of it.
Yeah, I just read it.
I'm sure it'll come up on my radar pretty soon. So
yeah,
and it's very interesting, the people who can find different ways of doing it, and who will kind of move on from their roles, or wherever they're living. When someone starts to get a suspicious feeling, they kind of move on and they just keep going and keep leaving this trail of molested children behind them. It's pretty scary, but it's good material to read. I know if this is the first time you're hearing any of this, it may feel pretty overwhelming. So just if you need to turn this off for a moment, stop listening to me talk about it, that's okay. I've also done this with a lot of workshops where people will come up to me afterwards and say, actually I was molested as a child, and this really brought a lot of stuff back for me, and it's all completely true, everything you were talking about. So just know that it gets easier as you get into this material more. I'm pretty comfortable with it because I've given, I don't know how many workshops and presentations on it. It's a very serious issue, but it's hard to handle, I think, sometimes, and people have very strong feelings about it. So what I want you to leave you with is just this idea of, I know what to look for because I'm informed about what's out there. Okay, so
Sarah, I have somebody here who has had a couple of people who've had their hand raised, so I just want to.
Okay.
I'm just going to unmute them for a moment to see if they still have a question, and if so. Angelina, did you have a question? Angelina? Okay, maybe not anymore.
Okay.
And let's see, just a couple people had hands raised, so I'm just not sure. June, did you still have a question or a comment? Okay, maybe not. All right, let's just move on then.
Okay, great. And if you have a question, we'll come back to you, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so some reasons why young people are targeted.
I'm sorry, Sarah. We do have one, just as we had that little break, just a question that popped in here. So let me read this one. let's see, you spoke of a percentage of predators that apply to be mentors. What is that percentage? Do we know that?
No, I'm not sure
Pretty
that,
hard to
I'm
know.
sorry if I kind of inferred that, but there's not, oh, from that quote from the
Yeah.
psychologist, he says a percentage. I don't think there are no statistics on that. Big Brothers Big Sisters may be, I know they have a national director of child safety, and they may be keeping track of those things within their own affiliates. But in terms of, there's nothing else being collected. I will say from our own program, it's a very small number, but I am always surprised at how many of them do apply and do try to get into this process. And again, I don't know that they are actual child molesters, but they're exhibiting so many red flags. It's crazy. We have had some volunteers who have reapplied after 3, 4 years, sometimes 5 years. They look to see if some of the same people are there, and if people have moved on, they try to apply again. So if you don't have a database where you keep track of people who have inquired about your program, now is the time to do that. So you can go back and look and see, okay, this person actually applied. We had one man who switched his first and middle name the second time he came back, which was very interesting.
The Mentor the Safety Net program was able to keep track of not necessarily the percentage of predators who apply, but are able to keep track of the percentage of background checks that turn up, any kind of disqualifying results. But that would be, at the end, I think that's like 6% or something like that. But yeah.
I have a slide about that.
Oh, right. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, should we move on? Okay, here's some information about young people. Seems pretty clear. These are some generally accepted statistics about who is actually molested. It's pretty, I don't know, I'm used to these numbers. I think it's interesting that boys are more likely than girls to be abused by a non-family member. So that may be something to really keep in mind in terms of if you serve boys in your program. Okay, go through this. Chosen for being vulnerable, isolated, or lonely. So that's often why a lot of young people are referred to mentoring programs. So it's important to realize that they're coming in kind of already primed for someone who wishes to do harm. But regardless of any kind of protective factors that they have, all young people are really at risk of the sophisticated seduction techniques that they use, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I want to get through these so we can spend more time talking about the tools specifically. I think it's really important to acknowledge that there's a lot of pressure to meet goal numbers. So many programs rely on federal funding that's really connected to the number of matches that you make. And I personally know of that pressure, not just in terms of funding, but also in terms of the young people, having interviewed them and seeing where they're at and knowing I really need to match them with a mentor right now. This is when they're open to it. This is when they really need someone to come in with a positive influence. So there's pressure to kind of move things along and possibly take people that you're not 100% sure about. At the bottom, I think it's really interesting. It's a low priority for law enforcement, and I heard this from a law enforcement representative who said, we're busy with so many other things that it's not something we'd follow up on. But I would say to really make friends with your local police department and let them know that you're an organization that's really out to protect young people in your program and even in the community. And could you call upon them if you have someone who is showing a number of red flags, or someone who seems potentially likely to be a child molester, even just to refer them on. And again, there may be some issues of I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to get into any kind of issues about slander or libel, but really just checking with people to say, if we come across someone who has a record or who seems really at risk, what should we do about that? Legally, there's nothing you can do except reject them from your program. but I think it's okay to inform other programs that you work with that there may be someone here who's high at risk. Okay, so looking at this information, this is a question for you to be thinking about. Do you already know about the rates of sexual victimization within your youth client pool? Some programs ask this specifically, and some programs don't. And honestly, I don't think it really matters, because most of the people I've spoken with who say, yes, we ask, but a lot of times they'll say nothing about it until we've gotten to know them a little bit better. And then some of these things come out. It's a very intense experience for a young person, and it's hard for them to share it right away. So if you ask or don't ask, just know that it's probably going to be there for a number of young people in your program. And then also thinking about the adults, really thinking about your volunteer pool. And at this moment, could you imagine any of your current volunteers as potential child molesters? I have to say, over the years, it's happening less and less, but there's always somebody who kind of is scribbling furiously in their notebook and says, I got to go make a phone call, stop some process happening. There are things that, upon reflection and with new information, you're going to look at your volunteers differently, and I think that's a good thing. Okay, let's get into the strategies. And again, it's a lot, I will tell you, it's a lot of information on these slides. We're going to go through them pretty quickly. I'm going to try to give some examples and save time for some questions as well. Okay, this is not legal advice. Again, as I said, I'm not a lawyer. Make sure that you check with your legal counsel, whoever you have representing your agency, or maybe it's someone you contract with, to make sure that this, all of any recommendations that you implement into your program are okay with your city, county, state laws, all of that. But in general, I will say these are general principles that apply to all volunteer programs that work with youth. You have the legal right to accept, reject, or terminate anyone at your discretion. That is okay, and you should be using this principle as much as you need to. There are no limitations on what information you can ask from volunteers, but there may be some limitations on who can view it and how do you store it, or can you even store it. And we'll talk more about that in terms of especially identifying information with background checks. And please know that every candidate has to go through the same process, no matter who talked to them or who brought them into your program. So, if the president of your board of directors comes in and says, I finally convinced my neighbor John to be a mentor. He's coming in tomorrow afternoon to meet with kids because I know he's going to be great, and he's ready to start tomorrow. Then you say, thank you so much. We really appreciate your support of our recruitment efforts. However, the first step for your neighbor is blah, 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 blah. So it doesn't matter who it is. And I will say that I went through our program and became a mentor, and I actually had to go through all of the steps as well. I didn't have to do training since I helped design it, but every other step was exactly the same for me. Make sure that you have the entire process complete and documented before you accept a candidate. There are a number of programs who have said, well, we were just waiting on one piece of information, but we wanted to get started right away, or maybe it was the start of the school year. We really wanted to match someone up. And that I can understand that impulse, but what if that one piece of information that you get back gives you information that you don't like? So then what do? You would naturally end that relationship, but then you're giving that young person a failed relationship right from the start. And it's going to be highly unlikely that they would be willing to try it again. And making sure that everybody is okay with the final decision. We'll talk more about that. And also ongoing monitoring is always important because there are some people who do get through these processes, as we saw from those examples, but making sure that you're on top of knowing what's going on and still looking for signs of any kind of red flags throughout the matching process, or I'm sorry, building the relationship process in case you see something that you don't like. So just in terms of planning, I'd like to throw this in here. if you don't know already, it would be good for you to go back and run some numbers on your program to figure out what your percentage is. Excuse me. I just got a little tickle in my throat. There's a number of people who inquire who get all the way through the match, and that's going to be probably a pretty small number. And within our program, we have it's between 8 and 10% of everyone who inquires about the program actually ends up being matched. And you can see the percentages going through the steps. That means that that we're taking a lot of people through a number of the steps who aren't actually going to be in the program, and that's why we recommend placing all the steps that require more resources towards the end of your process, so that you're not wasting time on people who aren't going to be right for your program. Okay, in terms of non-negotiables, maybe this is something we can ask and see if anyone has a quick answer to. Does any program have any criteria that's absolutely no way, if this shows up, is this person ever going to be a mentor? So April, can you monitor that?
Yep, I'm watching to see if anybody's typing.
Okay. And I threw this in there. I surprised April with this.
Sometimes it takes a moment for them to submit, but
so this is something that you have in your process where you say, there's absolutely no way we would accept anyone who has this.
So Lisa mentioned that if the person is listed on the sex offender registry.
Excellent.
Thanks, Lisa. Anybody else? Another non-negotiable? Oh, got another one. If they have any, this is from Chris, any abuse, neglect, violence, domestic violence, or etc. charges.
Great.
We've got a couple more now too. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Child abuse and neglect convictions, recent DUI or sex offender registry. This one program is governed by the school district policy, so anyone with DUIs within the last 7 years can't be a volunteer. Any offenses against a person, such as murder, manslaughter, aggravated assault, kidnapping, or robbery, any crimes against people, any felonies, and
okay,
I think
that's a great list. And you know, for some people, you may not be thinking of it in terms of being non-negotiable or rejection criteria, but you may already know about this. But it would be fantastic if you just get this on paper. Make sure you have a list of these are let me give you another example of what to call it. Non-negotiable disqualifier. So if anything comes up where you say, it doesn't matter who it is or what the circumstance is, these people will not be accepted into our program. So here's some examples, and these are examples that people gave, which was excellent to hear. Let's see, crimes against children, abuse, termination from a paid or volunteer position because of misconduct with a child, failure to disclose a felony conviction, DUIs. Again, you can decide how many years that would make sense for you. And I would also add, it's really important, if you have this on your list, one staff member who really feels uneasy about this volunteer or has safety concerns, that should be a non-negotiable disqualifier. Now, I know a lot of people gave examples of convictions and things on there. There are programs who work with young people who are either experiencing probation, or maybe they're only involved in the juvenile justice system, and they're looking for mentors who've had those similar experiences. So if you have an across-the-board non-negotiable disqualifier of any kind of conviction, that may not work for that kind of program. So you may also want to have something in your policy that says this is a mitigating circumstance. So you want to take a look at the nature of the offense, the date, how long ago it was, whether it was a misdemeanor, what was the result that happened, maybe it was an acquittal, what kind of sentence happened, or looking overall at the sum of offenses. Maybe it was an adult who's now in his 40s or 50s and had a string of misdemeanors when he was in his early 20s. Maybe there was some time served, and maybe this applicant has been kind of on the straight and narrow path since then and is looking for ways to give back and share his experiences. So taking a look at all of those things under consideration. So you may say this is sort of like a case-by-case basis of something that comes up. So this is a great thing to also have in your policy. Okay, so this is kind of what we're looking at overall to come to a final decision in the middle. You're looking at information from written materials, external documents, all of your impressions that you've gathered, observations of that applicant in your training and interview, and using your informed intuition. Those all come together for the final steps. These are the tools that we're going to go through, and again, I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but all the information is here for you to look at. So we won't go over specific access or website links, anything like that. It's on here for you, but I just want to give you an overview of what we recommend. And specifically, when we talk about informed intuition, oh, and I will say, I should back up, that I've pulled out each tool and also connected them with red flags that you may see when you use that tool, and also examples of what that might look like. So that's why I listed the tools at the beginning. So sometimes people talk about this idea, this is what we really emphasize in our book, is informed intuition. So how do you know when there's an applicant who comes in and he's just not right for your program? So if you have an answer to that, if you can just type that into to the question box, and let's see what people say. These are things that you just know. You just know right away. Maybe you're not sure why, but you can just see, this is not going to work out for us. Does anyone have any good examples?
There's one here about they want to fix a child.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see what else we get. I'm sure there's more typing going on. Looking for, I don't see any hands raised. Their goals and motivations don't match with our organization's goals.
Great.
It seems too urgent to get matched, like they're really antsy to get matched. Mm-hmm. And there was someone where someone says they had a gentleman who was using strange language.
I actually led an information session for our program when we had a potential applicant who was from Africa, and his command of English was really so poor that there was no way it could work. So yeah, those are some of the things.
Yeah, I wonder if there's strange language about kids, or I don't know. There's a few
probably
more here about make the hair on the back of your neck stand up just meeting them. Mm-hmm. They seem more interested in meeting their own priorities. Saying specifics about what they want from a mentee. Mm-hmm. This one says, we do the mom test, in quotes, a gut feeling, and if they lie or don't take responsibility for something that they bring up, like it's someone else's fault.
That's
interesting.
Great. Okay, so do you have any more?
Let me just, want to make sure I get everybody. And then there was a question too, but I think this is what we're getting at, is how do you tell a volunteer that they're disqualified when it's just staff feeling uneasy or unease? So I think this is really, and that's what I had said before, is that this informed intuition is where we'll talk about that. But
Yep, we'll definitely get to that. Okay, so great. So some of you have some of those ideas. This is also supported by, this is the, he's now a sergeant, the police officer who I've worked with on these trainings. He says, I have investigated hundreds of child predator cases involving thousands of victims, and he's not exaggerating either. In the case of every single victim, there was a woman, a mother, agency staff, teacher, who looked back and said, I thought something wasn't right. I had a funny feeling about him. He has since gone back and amended his statement and said, I don't think I just said it was only women. But he says that in most of the instances, it was usually a woman who sensed something but he's not trying to discriminate against his own sex and saying these are things that men can be open to as well, but there are times when without any kind of training or education, they may not be as aware of those kinds of things. So, but it is very, very important to pay attention to that. We feel like it's actually the most critical factor. Some theories on intuition, which I saw recently and I really like, because it says it's a judgment that appears quickly in your consciousness. You're not really fully aware why, but it's strong enough to act upon. So there are reasons why these things come up. And in terms of how it happens, I like that number 2 at the bottom. This means that you get better at it the more that you practice it in terms of what's happening in your brain. So the more interviews you do, the more applicants you see come through the process, the more you see this stuff come up. And you see it earlier on, and you can always, you can kind of grab someone earlier in the process and perhaps pull them from going all the way through, the more that you know about it. Okay, so we're also going to be throwing in some red flags. These are specific kinds of things that when we came up with the book, our executive director, who's been here a long time, she went through all the, actually she's been here since the very beginning for 31 years. She went through all the files of candidates who've been rejected, and she said she made a list of kind of organize them into categories. And I'm going to go through each one of these as it relates to a tool, and you'll get a sense of what it means there. Okay, so starting with the tools, we actually call interactions a tool, because this is a chance for you to really notice exactly what is going on with any kind of interaction you have with a candidate. Maybe it's from the very beginning when they email you, and maybe it's a really inappropriate email address. It's happening less and less, I think, as people are more technologically savvy, but in the beginning of the internet days, we would often have people who had just the most inappropriate emails inquire about becoming a mentor, and that's clearly a sign that it's not the right person. So just any kind of inappropriate or unusual questions or comments, responses to the screening process, and then if they've actually been matched in the program, if you notice through your ongoing monitoring any kind of inappropriate behavior. And I will say, in terms of unusual questions, occasionally I'm asked to sit in on some interviews with our direct services program, and I went on one just last month, I think. And if we have a policy where if someone isn't sure about an applicant, 2 staff will go, and we'll say that the other person is a supervisor, just kind of doing a review of that person's work. So they're really looking at the staff person and how they're conducting the interview, and not there to assess the volunteer applicant at all. So I went along on one, and there were a number of things that came up through the interview. But then at the very end, we ask, is there anything else we should know? Do you have any questions for us? And this candidate said, well, just, I'm just curious so far, are there any red flags that are coming up for you? And I was really surprised that this person said that. And I actually had someone else say it in another interview that I did. And I think that there were different intents of how they were using that term, red flags. But that's a very unusual question or comment to come up with. Okay, here's an example of a red flag of extreme behavior that you can see in any kind of interactions. I think somebody mentioned this, somebody who's impatient with the process, who really wants to get matched with a mentee right away. That's a very good example of that. In terms of interactions, we should know that 90% of child molesters and child predators are men, but the number of women, it's really growing, and I think there's still a different perception about women offenders as opposed to male offenders. So everyone recognizes on the left is Mary Kay Letourneau from, I think it's from Utah, and then Deborah Lefebvre from Florida on the right. These were women who had inappropriate sexual relationships with very young boys. And in the case of Mary Kay Letourneau, she ended up continuing a relationship with him, had several children with him, and then at the time he turned 18 and after she was released from prison, where she served 2 sentences, they actually got married. So when you talk about interactions, who comes through your door is very important to look at. So if it's a woman, don't just say automatically, okay, this woman's going to be fine. There are things to look at as well. Something also that some people have this idea that child molesters, especially if they're men and they perpetrate against boys, that they're homosexual, and that's definitely not the case. Most of them are recognizably heterosexual. So this is a little snippet from a pretty horrific case out here in California where 2 men were arrested. They were roommates, and they were arrested for molesting a number of neighborhood children. And the man on the left, Frederick William Everett, he was, they talk about him in the article, he selected his future wife so he could molest her 6-year-old son and later sexually assault their 3-month-old infant. So he was married, looked like it was a normal kind of relationship there, but that's not, definitely not the case. And if anyone has watched Dateline to Catch a Predator, that was a very interesting show. I think they still have marathons out there. I'm sure you can watch it on the internet. It's a very interesting show where they set up these kind of sting houses to, after going through online chats with adult men, usually I think there was 1 woman in all the cities, but people who are really intent upon having some kind of sexual contact with a child. It really speaks to this idea from research that these are average Americans. There's nothing identifying about them in terms of demographics that will say this is who you're looking for. Okay, the next tool we're talking about is a program orientation or info session. This is really the first chance that someone gets to hear about your program, and also a chance for you to assess that person. So make sure that you're detailing every screening step and level of monitoring, because a lot of times that will be a deterrent. Have a statement that any material you get is confidential and becomes the property of your agency. And again, you're looking for these red flags, inappropriate or unusual comments. Here's a red flag that could come up, inappropriate behavior. Sometimes they may be sort of vague how they learned about your program, and that may not seem like such a red flag, but if you have someone who says, oh yeah, I saw your program on the internet, you want to find out, did you see our listing on Volunteer Match, or did you find out about us through Boy Links? This is an example of a website. It's sponsored by a group called Free Spirits. They are boy lovers, and they have the right to put material out there, and they're making it very clear that this is, they're not giving this information for anyone to facilitate inappropriate contact with boys. It's all out there, but look at who, and this is from about 1.5 years ago, look at who they're connecting with. Advocates for Youth, Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, Boy Scouts of America, Children Now, the next page, Mentor, Save the Children, YMCA, Youth Coalition, right? So these are really well-known organizations, and they have nothing to do with this. They are not linking with a site like this, but there's also nothing they can do about it. So it's good to know that your program may be listed somewhere that you didn't intend to list, but I should say too, don't go look up this information. You don't need to go seek out and find out all this, where all of this information is, mostly because the FBI does monitor it. So be really careful about what you're looking at. But just know somebody could be referred this way.
Sarah, we do have, I just want to check, and let me just, there's a few people who've been raising their hands, and for some reason, the signal to me is popping up, and then I look at it and it says their hand's been raised for a long time, but it's just popping up for me, so there must be some sort of strange delay with the hand raising. But I wanted to check with Faye. Do you still have a comment or a question? If not, you can just stay silent if you want, but I'm going to unmute you just in case you do. Anyone? No, Faye? And there could be that people are hitting it and not intending to, but Faye, if you do have a question, I'll keep an eye on that. But the hands raising thing, just be patient. Just for some reason, there's like a little bit of a delay, I think. That's all.
Okay.
And then if you want me, do you want me to launch the poll at some point? Or?
Oh, I completely forgot about our polls.
Okay.
Yes, let's start the polls.
Great. So we have several polls, but just so we can find out who in our attendance, who's attending the webinar today, kind of what they're doing. So we're going to launch this poll, and you can answer yes or no. It's pretty quick. We're only going to give you, 45 seconds maybe for everybody to respond.
And I apologize. I get rolling on this.
That's okay, but thinking about our strategies, yeah, we want to see what people are doing.
Okay, so the first poll is, does your program offer a program orientation or info session, right?
And this is different than your pre-match training, different than training. So
yes, this is just the first step where someone finds out about what you do.
All right, I'm going to close in about 10 more seconds, and we'll just share what based on who has voted, because it's pretty convincing here. All right, I'm just going to close and share. So good news. 91% say yes and 9% say no. So
okay.
Most of that, it's not exactly a scientific data, considering that you signed up for a webinar on this topic. So that might be padding the statistics a little bit, but that's just interesting to know. So I'll go ahead and did everybody get a chance to see that? I'm going to close that then.
Okay. And should we do the next? I think the next one is about, our next poll has to do with
application. You want to do that one?
Let's go ahead and do that one.
And one more here for now. Does your program require a written application from potential mentors? Yes or no? And again, I'm only going to give it about 30 seconds.
Okay.
And people are voting fast, so that's good.
Excellent.
Wow. All right, I'm going to close and share with everyone. Look at that. 100% said yes.
Excellent. Excellent news. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the written application. I will say that this is probably the one step that most programs do, and the statistics I gave earlier about in our county where programs that use youth as volunteers, this was the one step that they actually had. So written application is pretty standard, but you can use it for learning about their intentions, their motivations, and you're also looking for gaps. You're looking for, are there any things that are inconsistent with the other information that you get? And in our book, we have a sample volunteer written application that you're welcome to make use of. Okay, I'm going to skip this case study because we're going to keep going through this. Now we're going to talk about the interview, and I believe we have that set up as a poll question. Should we go to the poll? So this is asking if your program requires a face-to-face interview. People are voting quickly. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I think I'll close it here when we just about everybody has voted. If not, it's no big deal. It's pretty convincing. All right. So you can see, so 82% yes and 18% no. I think, again, I think this is reflective of who signed up to be here and sort of the quality of the programs who are engaged in this kind of training, because when I do training with new programs or, even, when we go and consult with programs, this isn't always the case. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of motivation. If you're signing up for this webinar, you're probably already doing everything well. So, but keep talking to other programs about it and let them know. So, and I wonder if the respondents who said no, they might be doing an interview, but it may not be face-to-face. So make sure that it, whatever kind of minimum standard you have for your program, make sure it's consistent. If you do have a community-based program, we highly recommend that you do the interview in the applicant's home. You get a really good sense of somebody from visiting their home environment and seeing what it's like. I did an interview one time with a man. He was probably in his mid-40s. He was an engineer. We are in the Silicon Valley, so we get a lot of engineers around here. He was really kind of presented as fairly low in terms of social skills, which may be very typical for a lot of engineers out here. But he was really interested in doing it, so I took someone else. We did the interview. We got to his condo and walked into the living room, and he had a shelf kind of near the top of the wall that went around the room, and it was filled with stuffed animals. And this is someone who didn't have children and didn't really have children in his life. So it was very interesting to see that. And there were a number of other red flags that came up that we eventually rejected him for. But had we not gone to the home, we may not have seen any of that information. Okay. And in our book, we also have a sample volunteer interview that you can use. This, from what's known in terms of research on perpetrators, we know that they relate better to children, including listening to children, treating them as if they're equal partners, and they feel misunderstood and discriminated by society. So these may be some things you hear during the interview. Skip that one. Specifically, in terms of a red flag of focusing on their personal needs, I think someone mentioned that when we asked that question earlier. Somebody who describes their match very specifically. And it may sound kind of outlandish that someone would come in and do this, but we have had people who've come in and said, I'd like to be matched with a boy about 12 years old, maybe dark hair, lean build. That's really specific. And that's a lot more specific than saying, I think I work with younger children versus teenagers. That seems to be more appropriate. But it's someone who's very specific is something to be worried about. And then here's a slide that I'm going back to, a little bit more in terms of how they groom community and groom the child. So come back and read this when you have a little more time, because you may then also start to see some of these things in the interview. Okay, background checks, and this is what everybody really likes to focus on and ask questions about. And I'm not going to give you completely specific information because while it is sort of a minimum standard you want to have in your application process, there are a number of errors that can happen in this process, so you can't rely upon it on its own.
Sorry,
so,
I had my finger on that, and I just went ahead and I accidentally hit it,
yeah,
so the poll is launched. Sorry. I had it all ready to go. So I guess we're going. Sorry about that, Sarah.
No, it's good. That's
okay.
Good.
I didn't mean to interrupt that way.
So does your program require state and or federal level background checks, right?
Yeah. Just
okay.
and then we're voting quickly again. That's good. Yeah, and we just said state and or federal, so if you're doing both or either, it's fine. All right. All right, I'm going to close and share. So
excellent. Yes, this is kind of what I expected, so fantastic. For the people who are not doing it, here's some good information.
And sometimes I wonder about, for those who aren't doing it, if we have any cross-age mentoring programs or peer mentoring programs where the mentors might not be old enough to even have a record, but maybe.
Yes, and you would not be able to get any of that information because if somebody does have a record as a young person, it's usually sealed. So you wouldn't even be able to find that out. So, but if you're working with adults, here's a site you can go to get for your state agency information. We really recommend doing fingerprint-based background checks rather than name or social security. It's not 100% accurate, but people can, change their names. I found out from another person, he owns a company where he does professional screening. he said that after Hurricane Katrina, the government issued brand new Social Security numbers for a number of people who lost all of that information. So just know it could happen. So you can't count on that. Some things, a red flag in terms of problematic background indicators. Obviously, if any kind of conviction comes up, we saw that under the non-negotiable criteria. But even if you're just talking to them and they talk about being abused, neglected, or sexually victimized, it's something you pay attention to. And again, I want to emphasize that red flags, if one shows up that does not say, it's not like this shows up, that means this person is a child molester. These are a number of things you're looking at. You want to see an overall pattern of what's coming up. So if somebody has a history of this, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are now a child molester or have abused children, but it means that perhaps they're more likely to. And you want to see how have they dealt with that situation. Did they receive any counseling? Have they received any treatment? What have they done with that information, and have they moved on from it in as much as they can? Okay, and I realize we have about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to race through some of these. But again, it's all the information is on the slides. This is from Mentor, the safety net program that April mentioned earlier. They did a pilot program for a couple of years when they processed, and I think they have some more updated numbers, but it's pretty close. When they initially processed 50,000 background checks for youth mentoring programs, 6.1% had a criminal record of concern. And for those who did have a record, even though they knew it would be performed, over half of them said that they didn't have it. And that's really interesting because that shows that a lot of programs say they're going to check and then don't check at all. So make sure you do. This is from a study from the National Association of Professional Background Screeners, and they found that there were a lot of errors with the FBI database. So almost 12% of it missed those records it should have identified, and 5.5% of them were falsely attributed to someone who wasn't even convicted of the crime. So again, don't rely primarily on a background check. It may be wrong. And also, a number of these people haven't even been caught. This is from the same case earlier. They say that this man has, he molested probably hundreds of young boys. He had been caught once and moved from one state to the other, didn't re-register as a sex offender. And again, at this point, he was convicted of at least 13 boys molesting them. This is a nice graphic way of getting really scared about it because at the very top, that represents the number of child molesters who are in the system. So you will see a record about them. But below that are the number who have actually been convicted, the number who have been arrested, the number who have been investigated, and the number who have been even accused or identified. So each, and then at the very bottom, the ones who've never been accused or identified. Each time you go up a step, it's a smaller number. So you're looking for everybody who fits within that pyramid, but you're only gonna find out information through a background check for just the top couple levels. Sex offender registries, it's free. You can go online and look for this information. But again, be really careful about, there's a lot of names in there, there's a lot of identifying information, and you want to know exactly what the nature of the offense was. They have people in there who have sexually abused children, as well as maybe someone who is 19 and had a 17-year-old girlfriend. They had sexual contact, and maybe the parents wanted this young man arrested, and he becomes a sex offender. So there are lots of different definitions for that in there. Know that if you do see someone who comes up with an offense who actually does have a record, check with your state laws to see if that's something you can report. Because in California, if someone who has any kind of, who is a registered sex offender, tries to volunteer or tries to get hired to work with children, they can be arrested again. So check to see what your state laws are for that. The Child Abuse History Registry, you can go on and check. There's a national clearinghouse. You may or may not be able to check within your states. Different states have different policies. In California, only state or agencies can have that access. So sometimes you can't even get this information. Again, It's just, there's no guarantee just by getting a clear background check. Okay, internet searches. I think, is this one of our poll questions, April?
Yep, here we go.
Okay.
Does your program do internet searches on prospective mentors? And this, we'll just leave it at that.
Okay. So this could be Googling, checking Facebook, checking LinkedIn, checking YouTube, all that kind of thing. Any kind of internet search.
People are giving some thought to this one, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe some people are thinking, wow, maybe we need to do that.
Yeah. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to respond, then I'm just going to go ahead and close it, and we can look at those results. If you still wanted to vote, though, get that in quickly, and I'm going to close.
Okay.
All right. This is what we have. So one of those tools that's maybe not being used.
And it may not be something that programs immediately think of trying. But again, you know, this is one of the tools that is pretty easy in terms of resources, because you have all this access to this information pretty easily. If your agency doesn't already have a Facebook page or MySpace, maybe create, you know, some kind of dummy program name so you can get in and you can take a look. You'll find out some really interesting information this way too. You know, and I should have said at the beginning, 90% of people coming through this process, approximately, you know, they're here for the right reasons. They're not going to come up with any kind of red flags whatsoever. But you want to pay attention for those small percentage of people where they may not just be the right fit, or they may be there to do harm. So be sure that you're checking all this kind of information, and also let potential mentors know that if you can find out information about them, their mentees can do it too, and probably a whole lot faster than we can. So here's an example of, I mentioned NAMBLA earlier. They're connected to networks of child predators, so I don't believe NAMBLA has a Facebook page at this point, but you may find that they're connected with other people in certain ways. There's some more examples. This is a red flag, over-involvement with children. So you may see that they are connected to a number of like teaching, scouting, church youth groups, other kinds of where it just seems excessive. They're very involved in all of these kinds of forums. And again, it's part of a pattern. It's not just one thing. Okay, character references, either employment and personal. I think this is one of our poll questions as well.
Here we go.
And the question is, does your program check employment and or personal character references? I appreciate everybody's attentiveness and really sticking with the presentation and being able to vote.
All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and close now.
Sounds good.
So most of you are doing some kind of reference check for your mentors.
Great.
Exciting to see. I thought maybe this would be one that fewer people did. I wasn't sure. Okay.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, that would have been I had to guess. But that looks great.
Excellent. And there may be some programs who work with youth as volunteers who may not do this. But again, I think that that's, you can still do this. You can maybe check with a teacher, maybe the counselor at school, maybe with a parent as well, or ask other young people who they know. And it doesn't have to be really expensive. So in our book, we have a sample volunteer mentor reference check list, some questions you can ask. But you always want to ask, would you feel comfortable placing your own child in the care of this applicant? That's a very important question. Something you can find out through references is this idea of under-involvement with adults, where adult connections really are superficial. We had an applicant come in who listed, for his 4 references, he listed 4 women who were in their 20s, he was in his mid-40s, who he's known for about 6 months through his church. And that was really not what we were looking for at all. We do require a family member, and we also require a coworker. He did give us a family member, his sister. We did the reference check, it was fine, and then we went back and looked at the interview and realized he had said he was actually estranged from his sister. So I'm guessing we didn't really talk to his sister, but that gave us a good example of who his connections were. And there were a number of other red flags that happened too. Okay, another tool, DMV record and insurance. I don't think we have a poll about this one.
No, we don't.
No, okay. So especially if you have a community-based program, this is definitely an important step to have. You may also want to consider it if sometimes DUI convictions may not show up in some of those other background checks, but it would definitely show up here. And then the Diana screen, this is a new tool that's being used in a number of youth-serving organizations. They've been doing pilots with the Boys and Girls Club and a few other things. And it's a really interesting tool that's based on research from convicted child molesters, looking at their attitudes and motivations. It is effective at screening to identify individuals who are at sexual risk to children. So we are actually in a pilot program with them, using it within our own process. So I highly recommend this. It's not cheap, and it doesn't take the place of anything else. But it may give you some more information that you like. So the website is there. You can go check them out. Some other things that people may have in place, your program or school district may require some of these. Pre-match training, and this is one of our poll questions, correct, April? There we go.
So again, different than the info session or orientation, but this would be later on to provide that pre-match training.
No matter how long it is.
Yeah. I keep muting myself, Sarah, but then or everyone.
Oh, okay.
I forget sometimes because I keep making little like chuckles or like little sounds. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and close and share. So most
Excellent.
of you are doing pre-match training.
Excellent. That's a great number. So there's so many benefits of pre-match training, and I think April, have you covered some of these ideas in the research and action webinars?
Yes, I think we've covered it there. We've covered it if anybody listened in on the mentors series as well, and then
yes.
For the Minnesota programs at least, you can always get in touch with me.
Great. There's so many different goals that or different outcomes you can have from a pre-match training, but don't forget that screening is also part of that. So again, you're looking for those inappropriate or unusual questions or comments, seeing how they respond to scenarios. You're looking at their boundary issues, how they might relate to a young person, and also to give them, in our book, we have a sample volunteer code of conduct, which gives very explicit instructions on what is permissible and what is not in terms of their behavior with their mentee, and then also a volunteer roles and responsibilities handout that they get that really delineates what they're required to do. And those are forms that we actually have our volunteers sign at the time of their match.
Hey, Sarah, we have a question back on the background checks, just about how often, I hear this question often, how often should you run a background check on current volunteers? I think it's sort of saying, do you keep doing it, once they're in, are they in, or do you keep doing it? Yeah.
It depends. So you should probably have that kind of information at least once a year. But check with your state, because I know in California we have something called a subsequent arrest notification, so that if you've already sent in a request for a volunteer, if something happens at any point later on with them, we get that notification. So it's kind of already set up for us, which is fantastic.
That's great.
Yeah, it's surprising. California is ahead of some things. Not a lot, but they're ahead of the curve on that one. But if that doesn't happen, then you'll need to rescreen your volunteers at least once a year if they're formally involved with your program. Okay.
All right, and
so
just a note for the Minnesota, those of you who are from Minnesota, when I send the follow-up email, I'm going to try to, for things where it says in California on the slides, I'll try to find the corresponding Minnesota information. I don't know why I didn't think of that before, but I will send that out to you as well.
Okay, great. So in terms of, let's see which step we were at, pre-match training, some of the things you may see, I think I gave some of those examples. This is what we call a red flag of unhealthy attitudes. Okay, and a final decision, I think, is this our last poll question? Asking if staff engage with, does your program involve staff in a final decision process? And this would be all staff who've had any kind of interaction.
Okay, 10 more seconds. We'll close this last one. Okay, I'm just going to close it there and share.
Okay.
That's more than I expected too. I kind of thought it would come down to one person, but in most cases, so this is positive to see. But
excellent. Yeah, it's really important to make sure everybody feels comfortable with this applicant because people pick up on things differently, and it's important to talk about it so that you're not disqualifying someone because maybe you wouldn't want to be their friend, but maybe they would still be an effective mentor. And in terms of the question earlier about rejecting volunteers, we have a sample volunteer rejection form in our book, but I will tell you that whenever you do reject a volunteer, you want to let them know that any information about this decision is confidential and that you cannot share it with them. So you're giving the same information for someone who makes you feel creepy as someone who may just not quite be ready to be that stable and positive adult role model. Because you don't want to have to give the reason. You don't have to either. Just send them a nice, polite form saying thank you for your interest and your time. Unfortunately, we've decided not to accept you. Some programs have said, well, we'll take them in as a volunteer in another area of our agency. But again, if you have any uneasy feelings about them being around children, there's no reason to accept them whatsoever. Okay. These are some things that you want to specifically look at when you do a final decision. It's not, I think I should change the name of this presentation to going beyond the checklist because it's really not just saying this is here, this is here, this isn't. You're looking for an overall pattern of what this person is bringing to your agency. So some specific things that you could look at. And I will close, because I know we only have a few minutes, with saying don't be afraid to reject a volunteer. It's really about the best fit and safety of the young people in your program. There's some more information here about ongoing monitoring and teamwork. I never get enough time to talk about this, and I'm sorry. There's so much material here, but it's here. Oh, I will say this is a new slide I added. Learning from failure. Really make it a point in your agency to figure out, to go back and find out what happened, what went wrong. If a match was terminated due to relationship issues, what happened? What could we do differently? What were some things that we missed along the way? Take a look at people you've rejected as well, who haven't even gotten matched. What were some of the things we noticed? Be aware of these things so that you can change your process and make it better for the next time. Okay, and then my last slide is about the starfish story. This is a great example to use in mentor training. Basically, it's talking about making a difference to one person, and I would usually read it, but we don't have enough time. So I appreciate everyone being here to learn more information about screening volunteers. I think it's very important. Here's the slide about ordering safe with a discount. Again, this will be on the slide, and maybe April can put it in the email as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then our new webinar series is coming up. We're going to be doing one on social media and mentoring covering policies, gaps, and boundaries in just a couple weeks, and you can go onto our website and sign up for that. I think that's it.
Okay.
Okay.
Here is the slide. If you look at the bottom here, for the SlideShare piece, if you wanted to get that right away, I will upload the updated slides there that Sarah mentioned at the beginning, that there's a couple additional slides. I'll upload those and replace it with that. So if you go into SlideShare and there's some sort of, it's missing, it's probably because I'm deleting one and adding the other. And then I will put up the slide with the information about the next Quality in Action webinar, the first Wednesday of every month, and the next 2 months are going to feature Andrea Taylor, who's also the keynote presenter at the Minnesota Mentoring Conference. And it is 1:30 on my clock, so if you do need to depart and exit the webinar, please feel free to do that. But I think if you have a lingering question or something you want to throw out there, you can hang on here for a few minutes and try to respond to those questions. And also just to note that, there's clearly a lot of information. We'll have to have Sarah back and cover more of that. Ongoing monitoring and support, which is really one of the most important, once they're actually matched, it's really important to keep watching at that point. I highly, again, recommend getting a copy of the book and really digging into it with your program and your staff. There's so much more nuanced information. It's such a great resource. Mine is dog-eared and post-it noted and highlighted like crazy. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to type those in or raise your hand now. And thank you for participating.
Thank you. And if anyone has any questions beyond here, feel free to contact me over email as well.
All right. Sarah, do you see the question from Bruce about statistics? Yeah. I don't know if you want to just...
I only see, are there statistics?
Yeah, Bruce, is there more to that question? I'll go ahead and unmute you if you want to talk to us at all. All right, Bruce, you're unmuted if you want to talk to us, but I don't know if you have audio. Oh, here's a little bit more. Are there statistics on people who have been thoroughly screened and cleared but later were accused?
I don't know if there's anything specific.
Right, just case studies.
It's, just some case studies, just some newspaper articles. An organization like Big Brothers Big Sisters, they do, since they are a national reach and they do have affiliates that all filter back to a national office. I think that they do have some statistics on that, but I don't actually know what they are. And again, you're also looking at some volunteers who may have worked with in different capacities with organizations, not necessarily mentors, and you do see a lot of that. But lots of cases in schools, which is very scary.
Mm-hmm. I've heard, I think there's an example here in Minnesota where, somebody had been cleared and matched, and then, but they violated a policy. So this is where that ongoing support and monitoring became important, and the program had very clear policies and terminated that match. Informed the parent that the match should be terminated. They did not recommend continuing any contact, but the parent then facilitated some ongoing contact with that former mentor, the person who and then there was an allegation of abuse. So, but it was really well done on the program's part that they had that infrastructure in place and were able to really quiet that storm. But we do have a comment here. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to say, to add to that, that's a tough situation because parents are in sometimes very desperate situations too, and may not understand why our program is recommending that a volunteer not continue to see their child. We've had to do it in our own agency as well, not for any kind of safety reasons, but somebody violated a policy, and you have to follow through with that. Okay.
This Kevin Ricks, I think it is, Kevin Ricks article brings up and illustrates so many different pieces, and includes one of the questions that I have is just about how do we train mentees, because among many examples of schools overlooking the licensing process, of being able, the whole moving around to different places, building trust, and just a lot of the red flags were all demonstrated, or people ignoring that informed intuition part. But also there were, in retrospect, there were victims who didn't report, or victims who reported and then, decided not to press charges, or victims who didn't want to report because they're embarrassed. And these were all teenage boys, and then felt really bad as adults now, 30 years later, thinking, well, they could have prevented so much more abuse. But I think about our mentees and how it's such an uncomfortable thing to talk about with parents and kids, because you don't want to scare them away from it. But how do we prepare them to tell? Yeah.
Yeah, there's some good programs. There's one called Darkness to Light, and that's a child abuse prevention program, I think. There might be curriculum, or there might be actual trainers. But when we were doing research for our book, we found that while it's good to educate young people about these potential situations, it can have a neutral effect, meaning that it may work for some young people, but it may not work for others because, number one, they may not see that they're in an abusive situation. A lot of child molesters are very, very clever in their seduction techniques, so they may not even after they've been molested, may not even feel like they've been abused. So it doesn't make sense, like it doesn't fall under that category of, oh, this is happening to me. It feels like something different. And then they often coerce them and make them feel guilty later. And so it brings up a number of really confusing and conflicting emotions. But we also, so we found that the most effective way in terms of helping to keep young people safe is educating adults, educating youth professionals. And I usually have a slide in there about that, but I was really trying to be minimal. It didn't work that well. But that is one slide I have in there because it's our responsibility as adults to make sure that these young people coming into our program are in safe relationships. So it's really fascinating when you look at the patterns and the techniques that they use, and how most of them are never ever caught.
Yeah, I think that slide early on about we focus so much on making mentors happy and recruiting mentors and supporting mentors and doing all of that, but to remember that, we need to have as strong a relationship with the young people and the families in our program as we do with those mentors, so that they're comfortable coming to that staff. So there's a couple comments where Levon said, I think having a mentee training and educating them on this matter, on how to report or who to tell if they feel unsafe, would be helpful. And we're working on a mentee training. We're finishing it up, and some tools with our executive youth board. So it's youth-led and youth-created tools, and it doesn't specifically say that, but it's more, any kind of discomfort, whether it's with the mentor's approach, kind of if they're focused on, if you feel like they're not focused on you and they kind of have their own agenda sort of thing, or, any kind of feeling unsafe. But but that's just something to keep thinking about. Maybe that'll be a future webinar as well.
But don't rely upon that training to lead young people to tell you if something's happening.
Exactly.
I definitely think it's great, and also building that relationship with the parents or caregivers, because a young person may tell their parents or caregivers, and then they, hopefully feel comfortable enough to tell you as a program that something's happening, even if it's about, I'm not sure about my mentor, just relating that, making sure they're part of that team would be great.
Let's just do one more question and comment, and then we can exit the webinar. If you hear of abuse and report it to police, but nothing has been found, should you bring it to the attention of community members to keep an open eye on the predator? I think we kind of touched on that, but yeah, that you can if you have those relationships.
Well, I mean, in terms of putting up flyers, no. That's, that can get you into a lot of trouble. If you hear of abuse from either an existing mentor or an applicant, well, actually it wouldn't be an applicant, but if you hear of something in their past, if the young person's if the young person has been abused by this adult volunteer in their life and it's reported, if there is no arrest or conviction, then it's something for you to keep on file. I personally believe in making connections with other youth-serving organizations in your community to be able to share that kind of information. Again, you want to check with all of your legal counsel to make sure you're not breaking any state or federal libel or slander laws. There's a lot of laws around identifying information and what you can share and what you can't. But I will tell you that when we had an applicant who he said that he had applied to a Big Brothers Big Sisters program in our area and was just put on a waiting list. And I was thinking, well, that's unusual because everybody needs male mentors. Why is this guy on a waiting list? And I called them and just said, well, I just wanted to check. We have an applicant who said he applied with you and is waiting. What can you tell me about him? And this person went and checked in the files and got back to me and said, all I can tell you is that the file was closed. And to me, that's enough information to be able to say, okay, they didn't accept this person. Maybe they told him that he was on a waiting list, in quotation marks, or maybe they said you're not accepted to the program, and he's now spinning it to say, no, I didn't really like that program. But because I checked with him directly, found out, okay, they're not using him as a volunteer. I don't need to know why because I have my own sense of unease about this. That confirms my thinking.
So maybe in a either both or either the written application and the interview to ask about where have you applied for other volunteer positions, what's your other volunteer experience, or what other places have you checked out, that kind of thing.
Or and also ask, have you ever been rejected or terminated from a volunteer position as well?
Great. All right. Well, Angelina summed it up well. She said, this was a great webinar. Our agency relies on volunteers so much. I feel this is extremely important to us. And thanks for making it free. So thank you, Sarah, for volunteering and sharing this information with us here in Minnesota. Thanks to, I should thank the M.A. Mortensen Company for, they actually made contributed some funding so that we could continue offering the Quality in Action series free for our programs here in Minnesota and all of our friends across the country. So for those of you who stuck around here for a little extra time, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to exit the webinar though. We've taken a lot of Sarah's time too, and watch for that follow-up email, and I hope to see you all next month. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone.